Yes, let's bring in Mike Florio, Pro Football Talk, a favorite here on the Morning Roast. And I read that sentence and kind of laughed. Mike Florio, if I read this to you, what would your reaction be? Listen to the 405ers podcast for a full preview of the Rams game, including how Jimmy G can escape the Rams pass rush. Isn't that laughable?
Because there's even a possibility that he will.
Mike, we're stuck.
There's no escape.
There's no escape.
Mike, we're stuck here, and I feels like we've done this episode 10,000 times over. As someone from the outside looking in, the whole, Jimmy Garoppolo, he gives you the best chance to win. The coach doesn't trust him, but here he is again. The starting quarterback got hurt, and they're back to this. How are you taking a measurement on this entire situation with the 49ers and the quarterback and Jimmy Garoppolo? Because I feel like my head's going to explode.
I think it comes down to this. As long as the other players can stay healthy enough to perform and make up for the deficiencies in Jimmy Garoppolo's game, the team has a chance. If things are going to fall apart, it's going to be an issue of injury. That's what happened against the Falcons, and I just think they got overpowered by the Chiefs. The Chiefs needed that game more than the 49ers because the Chiefs are essentially a game and a half behind the Bills for the most important thing to them, which is the seed higher than Buffalo, so they don't have to go to Buffalo at any point in January. The 49ers don't need a high seed. They just need a ticket to the party. And I think if they get in and they're relatively healthy, they're one of the few, if not only, teams in the NFC that could go to Philadelphia and win, could go to Dallas and win, could go anywhere and win. They've got the formula to travel in the postseason, whether it's outdoors, indoors, good conditions, bad conditions, defense, running game. And the stronger the defense in the running game, the less you need out of your quarterback. The weaker the defense in the running game, the more you need your quarterback to do something. And we know that means Jimmy Garoppolo is eventually going to do something stupid, like the throw that took the air out of the balloon on Sunday.
Oh, my gosh, Mike. It's literally driving us crazy talking about this guy. I've been getting depressed driving down to Levi Stadium knowing I have to watch this guy at quarterback. And, look, at one point I was a big Jimmy fan. But the head coach told you he doesn't trust the quarterback. So I kind of blame the head coach for keeping the quarterback around. Why is he still here? 3 years later after Super Bowl 54, when it was apparent he didn't trust him then. With all that said, what do you think of the Christian McCaffrey trade?
Well, look, it's another example of a calculated risk, and it's a real risk because if he gets injured, and he played in 10 games in 2020 and 2021, not 10 games each, 10 games total, after he got his major contract, after he had only the third 1,000-yard rushing and 1,000-yard receiving season in league history. Roger Craig and Marshall Faulk were the other two. He hasn't done much. He's 3 years older than when he had that high water mark. For running backs, they age like presidents and or dogs. 3 years is a long, long time. So it's a lot to give up, 2, 3, 4, and a 5, especially when you look at what the Jets gave up to get James Robinson, a 6 that can become a 5. Now, James Robinson isn't Christian McCaffrey, but the gap between them isn't so great that the compensation gap should be that big. I think the Jets got a steal in Robinson relative to what the 49ers have given up, and it's all going to be determined by how healthy he stays and how effective he is. And it's too early to tell. I was impressed with how much they used him last week. I had a feeling they were spreading BS by telling people it was going to be a red zone package only. There are plenty of willing reporters out there to just repeat on Twitter whatever they're told, just so they're in line to be told something else the next time around. He had one red zone touch out of his 10. He had more touches in the 49ers' own red zone than he did in the Chiefs' red zone. So I think we'll see more and more of him. The question is, can he stay healthy? He's great when he's healthy. Can he stay healthy? That's what I'm concerned about. And it's inherent to the position. Rashad Penny of the Seahawks
for sure
had some very poignant comments 4 days before he broke his leg about how hard it is to play running back. You're getting hit by large, fast, strong men on every part of your body. You're going to get hurt at some point.
Yeah. Well, what do you make of the 49ers?
It's training. It's all this stuff. So anytime a team has a repeated cluster of injuries, there's a point where it's no longer bad luck. There's a point where you got to take a step back and you got to say, what are we doing that we're possibly doing wrong? What could we do better in terms of stretching, in terms of practice time, rest time, weightlifting, how you structure your day? At some point, that same willingness of a coach to self-scout, film, strategies, plays, you've got to apply that same scrutinizing eye to the way that you're getting guys ready, because maybe you're doing something wrong. Maybe it's something Shanahan-related. Maybe it's something training staff-related, medical staff-related, strength and conditioning-related. I think it's about the Chargers all the time. And, we spend 7 months of the year talking about what we think teams are going to be under this flawed, and we know it's flawed, assumption that everyone's going to stay healthy, because we just don't know who's going to get injured and when. These teams that repeatedly have injuries that break out in significant numbers, I think they're doing a disservice to themselves if they don't do everything they can to figure out why and what we can do to maybe change this, because it can't just be horrible luck.
No doubt. Mike Florio, Pro Football Talk here on the Morning Roast on 95.7 A Game. What do you make of this? Because I know you pay attention to everything. George Kittle, after the Atlanta game, made a statement saying that not every position group played 100%. They didn't give it their all. Shanahan debunked that. The next week, after the Chiefs game, Kittle basically made a comment saying, we've got all these playmakers, but we need the ball in our hands. It feels like that locker room, including George Kittle, who's a captain on the football team, is starting to point fingers. Do you see it that way as well?
Well, anytime a player, especially a guy like George Kittle, who doesn't have a reputation for being that blunt, being that candid, starts saying things like that, you have to wonder, is there something going on behind closed doors that is wearing on the players? And, Kyle's been there a long time now, and we hear this all the time. Do coaches sometimes get to a point where the message gets stale? It happened with Pete Carroll in Seattle. He eventually had to basically throw everybody out except Russell Wilson because the message got stale. Veteran players rolling their eyes like Richard Sherman. You can't have that when you got younger players that you're trying to properly indoctrinate into the way you do things. So anytime you hear that kind of stuff, especially coming from a guy like Kittle, there's some frustration that he's not able to fully maintain and manage and conceal. So, yeah, I think it's something that merits attention, because if it's coming from him, there's other guys who feel it, and I have a feeling it's just a matter of time before other guys start saying the same thing.
How do you get more out of Deebo Samuel? Because it just feels like his production is way, way down. He's got under 400 yards receiving right now. He has the one big run in the run game, in the Trey Lance game, where he had to break a couple tackles and he got 50. Other than that, it's been almost non-existent. What do you make of Deebo not being as impactful this year?
You got to design plays to get the ball in his hands. And see, now that you have Christian McCaffrey, unless he gets injured, you're not going to have this late season dynamic where all of a sudden they start running with Deebo and they run more with Deebo and they run more with Deebo. And it seems like the more that he ran the ball, the more overall involved he was. He just realized we got to keep getting the ball to him. And if you don't get him involved, you never get to that point where you just see what's happening on the field. It's like, hey, we have to make sort of effort to get the ball to him. But Shanahan's got the plays that will get the ball in his hands. You got to get into a rhythm. You got to get into a flow. You got to sustain drives. And it all comes back to the quarterback, too. There was a play in that Broncos loss that should have been a win. And it wasn't last drive. We saw the interception that killed things. It was toward the end of the game when they're trying to hold the lead. And Deebo ran a pattern
out of the backfield, the Texas route out of the backfield.
And he just missed him. He threw it 3 yards behind him. If he gets it remotely accurate in that spot, I don't know how far. He may still be running. And they would have won that game. It was a point where a big play there would have broken the backs of the Broncos. It's little hidden things like that make a difference. So Garoppolo is a big part of this. And, hey, I guess it's good that they kept him around, given what happened to Trey Lance. But we need to go back and ask again, why did they feel the need to invest 3 first-round picks and a third-round pick in one player when you know the quarterbacks can get injured, especially a mobile guy who played defensive back in high school, who hasn't played at this highest level of competition, North Dakota State. Look at what happened with Carson Wentz once he got to the NFL. You get banged around, you get beat up. This is something that may not go away. hopefully there's a book to be written someday about exactly what went on.
So time will tell. I mean, Big Ben Roethlisberger came from a small school, and he had a fine career. I mean, there's a lot of guys that have come from smaller schools that have had great careers.
I'm saying you're taking the risk.
I agree with that. And
all I'm saying is you're taking the risk. Why would you take that risk?
I hear you.
Too much of a risk to take.
Okay, so knowing what we know now and what's been happening in New England, just forget the amount of draft picks, whatever. Trey Lance, Mac Jones. Do you still believe they should have taken Mac Jones?
Well, I think they should have stayed where they were and not invested 3 total first-round picks and a third-round pick. I think that was just a freak out. I really do think after they saw Patrick Mahomes and Tom Brady in the Super Bowl that year, they didn't scout Patrick Mahomes. They just wrote him off because they were waiting for Kirk Cousins at the time, of all people. But I think they'd have a Super Bowl win if they had gotten Kirk Cousins, frankly, because he's the perfect quarterback for that offense. And then they said no to Tom Brady when he wanted to come home to San Francisco. I think they just felt compelled to make a big move, to make a bold move, and they got themselves in position where they could have taken Justin Fields, Mac Jones, or Trey Lance. And right now, it looks like Justin Fields was the best of the three. I mean, it's going to change. It's going to shift. We're not going to know what the verdict on these three guys is until we get a few more years out. But right now, Justin Fields is looking pretty good. The Mac Jones stuff in New England, I think, is rooted in some of this Shakespearean Bill Belichick bullcrap that kept Malcolm Butler on the sidelines for most of a Super Bowl when they needed him on the field. But Belichick tries to move these points with his macho head games. I think that's what's going on with Mac Jones, frankly. So I just think, you mentioned Roethlisberger. The Steelers stayed put at number 11 and got him. If I was the 49ers that year, I'd have stayed at 12 and just let the board play out. Steelers did that and got Kenny Pickett this year. You don't want to add. Here's the key. This is the psychological aspect of it. There's already going to be a ton of pressure on a first-round rookie quarterback. You don't want to add even more to it, to that kid. You're doing that kid no favors on the way through the door. He's not just one first-round pick. He's 3 plus a third. Too much pressure for anyone that age to have to carry, whether it's Robert Griffin III, Trey Lance, anybody else that's on the other end of that big, huge trade up to the top of the draft.
Wow, Mike Florio's on fire here. We'll let you go in just a second, but you're breaking all this stuff down with the draft and Trey. You know what? This team, when they told Michael Silver, players and coaches, they went up to Michael Silver after the game. I can't unread this article in the Chronicle where they basically go to Michael Silver saying, Jimmy gives us a better chance to win. And look at him now at 3-4. It's almost like karma. Be careful what you wish for, Mike. Be careful because Jimmy, I don't care what anybody says, does not get this team the best chance to win.
If everyone's perfectly healthy, they can win. The moment that guys get too banged up, I foolishly thought they'd beat the Falcons and cover the spread. It's like, next man up, they'll be fine. They need to have all their guys, especially on defense, completely healthy to neutralize.
Is there another team, Mike, and I don't mean to cut you off, is there another team in the last 5 or so years, as like we really start to hyper-focus on quarterback play and things like that, is there another team we talk about in that way, the way you're talking about the Niners? If everything goes well around them and the quarterback doesn't mess it up, they can win the Super Bowl? Because it feels like we give them the benefit of the doubt that maybe we don't give like a Tennessee Titan type of a team.
Well, but the 49ers are the only high expectation elite team.
Gotcha.
They're the victim of being that good. That got John Fox fired in Denver. They were just good enough to drive everybody crazy, and John Elway eventually got rid of him. And what happened in 2015? They had a quarterback who was being held together by Elmer's glue, but they had enough around him that. And look, Brock Osweiler could have won Super Bowl 50. But Brock Osweiler wouldn't have gotten them there. Peyton Manning made some great decisions in the playoff win over the Steelers to get the Broncos out of some play calls that weren't good. He knew what to jump into. But he wasn't physically dominant like he used to be. That's the most recent team that was able to win a Super Bowl without having a high-end quarterback, and everything else went right. And that's the formula the 49ers are trying to parlay into a Super Bowl win until they get their franchise quarterback. But the easier path is to have one of the franchise quarterbacks.
Exactly.
Then a lot of stuff can go wrong, but the end result is still going to go right.
All right, Mike. Good stuff as always, man. We'll talk to you soon, brother.
Thanks, guys.